All right. Well, turn to Matthew chapter 5. I'm going to read verses 38 to 42 in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew chapter 5, verse 38. And there we read, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other to him also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away." All right, well, we're continuing in the Sermon on the Mount on our Tuesday night Bible studies, and we come to maybe one of the most misunderstood, maybe misapplied verses, and maybe all of the Bible. It's here that the unsaved find supposed contradictions in the Bible, and there are just unrealistic and ridiculous requirements, they say, that are given here. It is here that many well-meaning Christians have erred greatly. They've taken the theme of not resisting an evil person and turned it into a mandate for pacifism, or being a doormat, or being a punching bag, letting people pummel you without defending yourself whatsoever. They say if someone comes into your house and beats the daylights out of you, well, then let them beat the nightlights out of you as well. And they've taken Jesus' words to mean that we should never engage in war, because they would say there is no such thing as a just war. And some have taken his words to mean that we are never ever to give anyone the death penalty. They say that Jesus is reversing the life for the life principle in Genesis 9:6. Some, like the Russian writer Leo Tolstoy, interpreted Jesus' words literally and saying that even having policemen or soldiers or judges is unchristian, claiming since these groups resist evil, we should therefore not have them. All right? Which means there should be no punishment for crime, kind of like what we're dealing with in New York City in a way. And basically, what you have, if that's the case, you have anarchy.
You know, it's a funny thing. I was just listening to a John MacArthur sermon today, and he said something like 50% of Christians take Scripture out of context to what it really means.
Well, we're going to sit this in its context in a minute.
Okay.
All right? And some has gone as far to say that Jesus is saying that we shouldn't take any kind of life, not even bugs. Like not even bugs. Right? Martin Luther speaks of a man who so misunderstood these verses that he wouldn't even scratch the lice out of his head. He didn't want to kill the lice. But none of these interpretations or understandings are correct. In order to understand what Jesus is saying, we must take the Sermon on the Mount as a whole, the whole sermon, and then see where these verses fit within the context of the Sermon on the Mount. Remember, the sermon starts out with the Beatitudes, which are a description of the Christian's character. His character is poor in spirit, meaning that he is aware of his utter inability to be right before God. He sees himself as a hell-bound sinner, absolutely helpless in the sight of God. He also mourns because he sins against God. He is meek and thus sees himself as nothing and without rights. He hungers and he thirsts for righteousness and so on. And so those first 11 or 12 verses speak about the character of the Christian. And now, when Jesus gets to verse 13 and following in Matthew 5, he shows them how a Christian should conduct themselves, right? So you have the character of the Christian and then the conduct of the Christian. And when we get to verse 20 of chapter 5, he tells them what degree of righteousness it takes to be in his kingdom. And that is a righteousness that far or super exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees. He says it's a righteousness that goes beyond an external obedience and strikes basically the very heart. Then from verses 21 to 47, he gives them 6 examples of this kind of righteousness, while at the same time exposing the self-righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. And in each of these segments, he begins with, "You have heard that it was said," and then, "But I say to you." You've heard that it was said, and then, "But I say to you." And then he shows them God's design and intention for the law on murder and adultery and divorce and oaths. And now in verses 38 to 42, he'll show them the heart of the law on retaliation. On retaliation. So what I'd first like to do is to explain the law of retaliation, and then show how the scribes and Pharisees took that and twisted it for their own sin. Then I would like to examine what's at the heart of not resisting an evil person. So let's look at the law of retaliation. Jesus said in verse 38, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And this is a quote from Exodus chapter 21, verses 22 to 27. And Jose, would you read that?
If men fight and hurt a woman with child, so that she gives birth prematurely, yet no harm follows, he shall surely be punished accordingly, as the woman's husband imposes on him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. But if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. If a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he shall let him go free for the sake of his tooth.
All right. And then also in Leviticus chapter 24, verses 19 and 20. Claudia, would you read that?
If a man causes disfigurement of his neighbor, as he has done, so shall it be done to him. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has caused disfigurement of a man, so shall it be done to him.
All right, now people read this, and they immediately think archaic and unfair. That's exactly what they think. But these laws weren't unfair at all. In fact, they served a very useful purpose. All right, you see, what they did was limit abusive penalties and excessive punishment. And more importantly, they restrained retaliation. These laws were not to promote revenge, but to prevent excesses because of revenge. And how is that? Well, by stating that the legal punishment was not to exceed the crime. So then the purpose of the law was to lay the foundation of justice by specifying the punishment a wrongdoer would receive, and to limit the compensation of his victim to an exact equivalent and no more. In other words, right, if I knocked out one of your teeth, you couldn't knock out 5 of mine. No. That would be unfair. Right? You couldn't do that. Or if someone today, bust a brake light on your car, you can't go basically destroy their car or get 15 years in jail for that. All right, so there's a proportion to this thing. All right, so because the crime doesn't justify the punishment if somebody breaks your taillight and then you total their car. Now, by the time we get to Jesus' day, physical penalties had mostly already been replaced by financial compensation. And what's important to understand here is that this law was for the judges and the governing authorities and was not for individuals. It was for the civil authorities and for the judges. This wasn't for any single person who wanted to do it. This was for the law keepers. This was how they were to keep law.
Pastor Peter, didn't Pastor Phil teach this Sunday on which part of the London Baptist Confession, and it talks about governing authority?
Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah.
While I was listening to it.
Yeah.
So it spoke
Yeah.
about that part of
Right. Yeah.
law enforcement.
Right. Absolutely. Right. They punish the evildoers and they reward those who do good.
Well, Romans 12:19 to 21. Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord.
I'm going to get there.
Oh.
Thank you. I'm going to get there in about 10 seconds. All right. Thank you, though, because that's right here. All right. So, where was I? All right. So you can't. So the punishment has to fit the crime. And by the time we get to Jesus' day, they're no longer dealing out physical punishments. Now it's financial compensation. And in fact, what this law did was it took away the possibility of someone taking the law into their own hands. Right? No vigilante, law keeping here. Now, secondly, how did the scribes and Pharisees twist this? how did they twist and abuse this law? Well, what they did was they taught that you could apply the law to personal situations. So therefore, you could exact retaliation on someone without having to go through the courts or the legal system of that day. All right, so if you put a scratch in my car, I could go put a massive dent in your car. You see, they applied eye for eye, an eye for an eye, and tooth for tooth to their personal relationships, and they used it for personal revenge. And the Old Testament and the New Testament forbid this. Somebody read Leviticus 19:18.
You shall not take vengeance, I don't think spell this right. Vengeance. Nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord.
All right, that's an old. Now, Romans 12:19, which Walter just read a minute ago.
We read, Beloved, do not avenge yourselves, but rather give place to wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord.
All right, so we're forbidden to take it into our own hands. We're forbidden to do that. Well, now comes the question. What exactly is Jesus telling his disciples? What does he mean when he says they are not to resist an evil person? Right? And question is this an all-inclusive statement? No. Should we never resist an evil person under any circumstances? Ever? Who says yes? Who says no? All right. All right. Well, the answer is no. Right? Jesus is giving us a kingdom principle concerning how we are to deal with others. And what he says is we are not to seek revenge or to retaliate. All right? For those who are poor in spirit, for those who mourn over their sin, for those who are meek, do not seek a pound of flesh. Right? We don't try to get even. Right? We don't go tit for tat, so to speak. It's not us. Right? Our motto is not, which you do see on some bumper stickers, right? I don't get mad, I get even. Right? That is unbiblical. We don't do that. All right? We're not going to see that on our bumper stickers. All right? This is not the heart of one who is who's a new creation in Christ. It is not the heart. It may have been as it unsaved you, but as a saved you, it should not be your heart at all. Right? We don't seek to settle the score with those who have wronged us. No, the driving principle now is one of love. Love. Right? So they know that vengeance has no place in their life. And they know that God will repay all evildoers. He will. Maybe not, we won't see it, maybe not even in this life. But at the end, everybody's going to stand before him and they're going to have to answer for what they did. Yes, Walter?
But we still we have a right to defend ourselves.
I'm going to get there.
And the ones we love.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm going to say that in a minute. All right, so.
Pastor Peter, a thought that I was having was an example of how we can see when the legal system, there's a court and there's a finding that someone didn't get the punishment that they should have gotten, or a family is still grieving so much that the punishment, they want the person who's found guilty either murdering their family member, just doing an injustice, and they speak at the end. And it's so telling, like they're grieving so much that they're not thinking, this is in God's hands, even though I don't think you got a just punishment. And they'll say things like, I hope that you suffer all the days of your life. I hope you will burn, and
it's funny you say all this, because what man wants more than anything is justice. Like, we want justice if something's been done to us, right? But we don't want justice against us, right?
Yep.
But we want justice for the people, and we don't want God to have justice. Right, the ultimate lawgiver. Like, we don't want God to have justice, right? But if someone hurts us, we want justice. We want them to pay the price of whatever they did. You're right. And it is sad, and we live in a
standard.
Oh yeah, and we live in a day where our legal system, and maybe it's always been around the world, where it's not always fair and honest and upright.
But even when it is fair, because the legal system says this is just punishment. Even when you have people say it's not enough. Right.
Yeah. That's the whole death penalty argument. Yeah. So, thank you. So what Jesus is ultimately teaching here is a heart attitude. He's teaching a heart attitude. And what he's showing his disciples that that self must be put to death. Self must be put to death. Listen, the most natural thing for a man is to love self and to protect self and to defend self and to exalt self. But Jesus says, if you're in his kingdom, then self must die. Self must die. And he uses 4 vivid illustrations to communicate this. 4 illustrations that say, you think you have rights, but guess what? You don't have them. You think you have rights, but he's saying you don't really have any. Right? You are not the center of the universe. You are not even the center of your own life. You are nothing and deserve nothing, and apart from the saving grace of God, you would be doomed. So don't think anything of yourself, so be poor in spirit. Right? That's the very first beatitude. The reason it's a first is because without that, nothing else will flow from it. Right? This is the heart and the mindset of the child of God, and we should be growing in this mindset. And to drive the reality home, this reality home that Jesus gives us 4 really hard to swallow examples of a life of selflessness and of what our attitude should be like when confronted with self. And please understand, he's giving illustrations to explain a principle. He's not giving hard and fast mandates to be literally followed. All right, so we're not going to be, like knocking people's teeth out and plucking their eyeballs and all that kind of stuff. Right? He's giving us principles, right, that ought to be followed. So with that said, I want to look at the 4 illustrations using 4 points. And the first one is a Christian's attitude towards insults. All right, and that goes to verse 39. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other to him also. All right? This illustration of selflessness is to turn the other cheek. Now, as I said before, this has nothing to do with being a pushover or being a doormat or being a pacifist. But it has everything to do with retaliation when insulted or disrespected. It's about retaliating when someone insults you or disrespects you. Right? And in order to understand this illustration, we need to look at Jesus' words carefully. First of all, he says it's a slap. It's not a punch. It's not an uppercut. It's not a karate chop. It's a slap. And quite honestly, I really don't think anyone has ever been seriously hurt from a slap. I don't know, man, you slap hard maybe, but most of the times, most of us don't. From a slap. And notice he says it is on the right cheek. This is important because it tells us that the slap, and when they would slap, how they understood a slap was with the back of the hand. All right, the slap was not like this, but with the back of the hand, which is a more natural way to slap, right? And that's how they understood it, with the back of the hand. And most people were right-handed. About 80% of people are right-handed or more. All right? So in order to slap someone on the right cheek, you had to use the back of your right hand. So, for instance, well, can I use an example? There's his right cheek. If I'm like this to Walter and I'm going to slap him on the cheek, I'm going to take my right hand, because I can't do my left, and I'm going to hit my right hand, and the back of my hand is going to hit his right cheek. That's how it's going to go. So it's going to be like, if I were to do it to Elena, of all people, right? Boom, it would be my back of my right hand on her right cheek. So we get the illustration there? It's important that these little details mean a lot here. All right, so it's back of right hand on the right cheek. And so a slap in the face with the back of the hand was a great insult. That was a tremendous insult. I said it from the pulpit before, but it's true. I told you guys when I was about 14, or I don't know, 13, 14, my mother and I were fighting all day. My father came home from work, he was exhausted. My mother right away says, Peter did this and that and this and that. And she just like rolls out the laundry list of my problems to my father. He doesn't want to hear it. I immediately defend myself and say, yeah, but she, and he went boom, right at the table. And that was it. And he said, you never call your mother her. And that was like and it hurt, but it didn't kill me, but I was humiliated that you know, like in front of my mother and my brother and my sister, you know, boom, you know, and that was that. It's a pride crusher, all right? And so it really is about humiliating, an insult. In fact, it was a crime in that day to do this. And the fine amounted to an average man's annual salary. You couldn't be slapping people on the back of your hand on their face. You couldn't do it, right? according to rabbinic law, to hit someone with the back of your hand was twice as insulting as hitting them with the front of your hand. Right? Twice as insulting. You see, it was a sign of contempt and disdain. And it was as if you were saying, you're worthless. You're nothing. You're a nobody. Boom. Right?
Even going back into history, Alexander Hamilton was killed by Raymond Burr.
Yeah.
Because of an insult.
An insult. Right. That's right. They had a duel. Right.
Right, they had a duel.
Right. A Roman slave, and I'm not going to say his name well, Epictetus or something like that, wrote this: a slave would rather be thrashed with a whip than to be slapped with the back of his master's hand. Listen, gang members and mob members today, they kill you for disrespecting them. They would kill you for disrespecting them. The slightest insult, the slightest sign of dishonor, and the bullets are flying and the knives are stabbing. You can't, don't diss me. Is that what they say? Yes. I'm a little older now. What's the lingo?
This.
Oh, there you go. I read. All right, don't diss me. All right, so I mean, they'll kill you for disrespecting them. So what Jesus is talking about is when he says someone insults you or dishonors you or humiliates you, this is all about insult and not about injury. We're talking insult and not about injury. There's absolutely nothing to do with defending yourself from physical harm. So if someone has a knife to your throat, right, what should you do? Kick them, punch them, bite them, karate chop them, spray mace in their face. Maybe Pastor Phil's, what does he have in there? Pepper gun? But I was told that Ishmael, who was a police officer at one time, he said if you spray a pepper gun inside, you get about 30 people. And I said, we'd want to spray that thing in this place. We'd all be on the ground like, someone comes in with a weapon and we're all on the ground because someone sprayed the pepper gun. All right? But you should defend yourself. You should defend yourself. You should, listen, you come with a knife, you might as well stab me because I can't defend. Of course you can defend yourself. Of course you can defend yourself. If you pound them to the ground, put your foot on their neck until the police come and all the while pray for them. But if you are mocked or taunted or humiliated or slandered or spit upon, turn the other cheek. Turn the other cheek. The Lord forbids us to strike back physically or verbally. He forbids us to take revenge or to retaliate. We who are poor in spirit and the meek must suppress and lose the desire to strike back. Right? The natural inclination is to, right? Yeah, you say something to me, I said something to you. Right? That's how it went. You did something to me, I did it to you. We have to fight against that. Somebody read Proverbs 24:29.
Do not say, I will do to him just as he has done to me. I will render to the man according to his work.
Don't say it. Don't say eye for eye. Don't say, you're going to get what you did to me. Somebody read Proverbs 20:22. What does it tell us?
Do not say, I will recompense evil. Wait for the Lord, and he will save you.
Wait for the Lord. All right. Well, Jesus says, set aside your right to be disrespected. Set aside your right to be respected and to be honored, and let yourself be insulted again and again. It doesn't mean anything. At the end of the day, the words aren't going to hurt you, right? And you're going to hear some verses on this in a second, all right?
It hurts your ego, though.
Well, right, but that's the poor in spirit part. The poor in spirit part is we should be growing in seeing ourselves as nothing, less and less and less and less. That's what he means when he says, turn the other cheek. This, brothers and sisters, means to die to self. Jesus is saying, die to self. Die to self.
The saying, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Well, that's true. That is true. Right? George Mueller said this: there was a day when I died, utterly died to George Mueller. His opinions, preferences, tastes, and will died to the world. Its approval or censure died to the approval or blame even of my brethren and friends, and since then I have studied only to show myself approved to God. So it was the day I died, he said. I stopped defending me. I stopped thinking well of me. I stopped wanting people to, honor me. Charles Spurgeon said this. I love this quote. He said, "Brother, if any man thinks ill of you, do not be angry with him, for you are worse than he thinks you to be." You've heard that, right?
Yes.
Right? And there's a truism there. There's a definite truism there.
But this is, I'm thinking about the verse that talks about where the Apostle Paul says that he has not arrived. This is not talking about arriving.
No.
To perfecting that.
Yeah, so that's talking about not sinning.
Yeah.
So he's saying that I still sin,
Right.
right? I haven't hit sinless perfection, as some of the Wesleyans would say, right? He's not saying that. He's saying I still sin, but I'm growing and I'm growing and I keep going forward.
So then you have some professing Christians that will use that
Right.
as a defense for defending themselves. Like, I'm not perfect. Like, I have not, I'm still a work in progress.
Well, I mean, we're all a work in progress.
But in regards to
Yeah.
that particular,
Yeah, but I mean, so
taking it personally when
So the
we're-
question becomes, like, even if we do defend ourselves, let's say we do retaliate, are we convicted that it's sinful that we did that? Or are we just saying, well, that's how it is, I need to grow, it's the old me is still in there, right? I mean, but is there a conviction of sin? Right, that's the question. Because if there is, then there's progress in a way.
Right.
If there isn't, then you're just going to keep doing what you want to do because you don't want people to say something about you or to you or whatever.
And also, by the same token, for a brother and sister, you should never do anything that separates a brother and sister. That's one thing that we should never do.
We should never. Yeah, and that's why there's so much ink in the New Testament about unity. Right? There's so much ink about loving each other. Over and over again, we're told to love each other. When you love somebody, you're not disrespecting them. You're not trying to humiliate them or insulting them. You're just not doing that. And if you really love someone, if they insult you, you're not gonna take it to heart. You're just gonna let love cover it. I mean, that's what you're gonna do. All right? And because we all have, listen, husbands and wives, right? Everybody who's husband and wife here, raise your hand. Elena? All right? You know the potential to insult or to ruffle the feathers or to dishonor, right? It's always there. It happens, right? Mike, only married about 5 years, 6 years? Right? Have you ever had a little insult go on or anything? What do you do? Take it to heart? Did you throw it back at her? No. You love her, you let it go. Dylan?
I heard yes. But I heard someone say, in marriage, you're not operating off the principle of fairness. You're operating off the principle of grace.
Right. Amen to that. Yeah. That's good. I'll use it one day. Very good. Very good. No, it's good. All right. And listen, when we die to self, it's easy to leave vengeance to the Lord. When we die to self, it is easy to leave vengeance to the Lord. Lord, you know. How many times I say to myself, Lord, you know. Lord, you know. Like something has happened, someone cut me off, I'm standing in line at the store and someone cuts right in front of me, and I'm like, am I gonna now, like duke it out with this old lady, or am I just gonna let it go? Right? So I just say, Lord, you know, she's in a rush. I'll wait, you know what I mean? And I'm more and more becoming like that by God's grace. I just say, Lord, you know. Because you'll take care of it, what if it needs to be taken care of. All right, so if someone treats you like garbage, Jesus says, don't treat them back that way, right? It is easier to not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Overcome evil with good. Don't seek to even the score. Don't seek to get the pound of flesh. Instead, show the Spirit of Christ to the evil person by turning the other cheek. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of meekness. And the meek, right? Jesus was a very meek man. That's power under control. He had all power and authority. He could do whatever he wanted. He could have called 72,000 angels to wipe out everybody on the night of his arrest, but he had power under control. That's meek. That's not weak. Right? Listen, people expect retaliation because that's exactly what they would do. So when you humbly commit it to the Lord and you love your enemy, that's not normal. That's not natural. They don't understand that. Like they expect you to get into it, right? But that's what Christians are called to do, right? And that's letting them see Christ in you. That's it. All right. So the first Christian's attitude towards insults. Secondly, attitude towards personal injustice. Verse 40. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. The picture Jesus uses here is of someone suing you, someone taking you to court. And the implication is that they have a legitimate case against you, and you don't have the money or the possessions to pay the plaintiff, so he will take your tunic. And a tunic was a long shirt, and most men only had maybe one of them, maybe two to their name. They didn't have a lot of them. And at that time, you could literally sue someone and take the shirt off their back. You could literally take the shirt off their back, even if that's all they had. Even if it's all they had. Well, Jesus says, if they sue you and take your tunic, which they were allowed to do, well, give them your cloak also. Give them your cloak also. And now this is where it gets interesting, because the cloak was a coat, and most people only had one of them. They only had one cloak. And in Jewish law, you could not sue someone and take their cloak. You could take their tunic, you could not take the coat or the cloak. Somebody read Exodus 22:26.
If you ever take your neighbor's garment as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down.
All right. And the garment in Hebrew is the outer garment or the coat. If you take it, you got to give it back at nighttime. Somebody read Deuteronomy 24:12 and 13.
And if the man is poor, you shall not keep his pledge overnight. You shall, in any case, return the pledge to him again when the sun goes down, that he may sleep in his own garment and bless you, and it shall be righteous to you before the Lord your God.
All right. You see, a man's cloak was an absolute necessity of life. It was his coat by day, and it was his blanket by night. All right. Coat by day, blanket by night. And to take a man's coat was to basically put him out in the cold. Put him out in the cold. So Mosaic law forbid that. It would be like taking someone's oxygen tank who had emphysema or something like that, because they need it all the time. Or maybe if they had congestive heart failure, taking their oxygen. So what Jesus is saying, if someone takes you to court and takes your shirt, don't be angry, don't be vengeful, don't be bitter, don't be resentful, don't retaliate. Instead, show them that your heart is good and give them the most valuable possession you own, which is your coat. Yeah, you want to take my shirt? Take my coat too. I give it to you. And what this will do is shock them and show them the love of Christ. And this is what it means to love your enemies. Right? You have...
Is that also I'm thinking about the verse that talks about heaping coals on the head.
Oh.
What's that one about?
Yeah, well, that's judgment. That's about judgment. All right. So the point here is, again, you get sued. They have the right to take your shirt, we'll say. All right, and you could be bitter and angry and resentful, but to show you're not, say, listen, you took my shirt and it's rightfully yours. I give you my coat too. So I'm not vengeful. All right, I'm not vengeful. All right, so we see the attitude towards insults, attitude towards personal injury or injustices. Thirdly, attitude towards civil injustices. Verse 41. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, the reason I say civil injustice is because what Jesus is speaking about here is Roman law. Roman law. And the law said that a Roman soldier had the right to make someone carry his equipment or anything else that he wanted for 1 Roman mile. 1 Roman mile. And a Roman mile was 4,854 feet, or 1,000 steps. And the purpose of the law was to relieve the Roman soldier, but it was extremely inconvenient to the citizen who was pressed into service. Right? And the Roman soldier could pick anybody at any time, in any place, and say, you, carry this, boom. And you had to go, it could go 100 feet or 10 feet, but you couldn't go more than a mile. But if you wanted you to go to a mile, you had to go the whole mile, carrying whatever it was. Now, if a Jew was told to carry a Roman soldier's stuff for a mile, it was more than an inconvenience. It was highly humiliating, highly humiliating. And think of it. The Jews were under Roman rule. They were slaves to Rome, literally. And on demand, they had to carry their oppressor's stuff. We have an example of this. Where's a good example of this in the scriptures?
When Jesus was going to be crucified.
All right, and what happened?
The Roman soldier, what was his name?
Simon of Cyrene.
Yes.
All right, so Jesus can't carry the cross. He's going down, but he's basically, because he's so badly beaten, basically he's ripped apart, and he's lost so much blood, and he's in so much pain, he can't physically carry the cross. And so they pull out Simon of Cyrene, and he had no option. He had no option. He had to basically carry it the rest of the way for Jesus to Calvary.
Now, that's just the cross member. It wasn't the whole cross.
Well, whatever part of it Jesus was carrying.
Yeah, okay.
So he couldn't carry it anymore. He wasn't strong enough to do it, and they wanted him to die on the cross and not on the road, and he needed to die on the cross and not on the road. All right, so
what you're explaining is the cultural, at that time, the cultural, the heaviness of how insulting it is to the Jew when the Roman authorities
absolutely.
that was like the cultural.
It's bad enough that you gotta stop what you're doing and for the next mile carry his equipment or something, or whatever he's working on. And you got to carry it for a mile. You got to stop everything. You got to carry it. You have no option. It's not like, I can get back to you. My mother's in the hospital. No, you got to carry it. All right, bad enough. But now you hate the Romans. I mean, you hate the Romans. You're enslaved to the Romans. You pay heavy taxes to the Romans. You're under their thumb. All right, and so it was highly insulting to the Jew. All right, Matthew 15:21 talks about when the Roman soldiers, the Roman soldiers compelled a certain man. They didn't ask him. They didn't say, you mind doing this for the next, 5,000 feet? Compelled him. They said, you got to do it. A man named Simon of Cyrenian, the father of Alexander and Rufus, and he was coming out of the country and passing by to bear. He was just walking by. You, carry this. Well, the Jews hated this law, mostly because it was a visual reminder that they were an oppressed people. It just reminded them that they were an oppressed people. And they had no option here. They had to carry whatever it was, a maximum of 1 mile. Maximum of 1 mile. But as soon as they reached the mile...
It's so telling of the mentality that we are supposed to have, that we're slaves of Christ.
Yeah.
So it's like a slave, it's like an attitude of being a slave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there were milestones, I understand, along the Roman roadways, and some of them.
Maybe, yeah.
There were milestones that was marked.
I guess you were counting the steps, because you had like 4,000 of those. So, I guess I don't know. I don't know how they measured it, but they did measure it.
Yeah.
So again, they had no option. They had to carry whatever it was for at least, for a maximum of at least a mile. But as soon as they reached the mile, by law, the soldier had to let the citizen go. 1 mile, you can drop it and say, I'm done. Now, Jesus says, not only carry it the mile, but give up your rights and carry it a second mile. Carry it a second mile. Give up your rights, carry it a second mile. In other words, the first mile was mandatory, but the second one is on you. The second one is on you. The emperor ruled that you had to carry the soldier's burden for 1 mile, but you showed them that you belong to a different, better emperor, of course, the Lord Jesus, and you carry it another mile. And what Jesus is saying is to show them that you have no animosity or vengeance or bitterness in your heart. Because I'm sure when they're carrying whatever they're carrying, they're cursing, they're grumbling, they're huffing, they're puffing, and they're swearing, and who knows what else they're doing. I'm sure they're not like whistling hymns or whatever. I'm sure they're like really grieved. So when a soldier says, okay, you're done, beat it, you say, wait a second, excuse me, Mr. Soldier, but I would be glad to carry your stuff for another mile for you. Let me go a second one. Let me go a second one. What do you think the soldier's reaction would be to that? All right? It'd be amazement, bewilderment. He'd probably want to know why. What's wrong with you? Why would you do that? Why did you joyfully carry this stuff for a mile and now you want to go a second? Listen, no one gives or goes one more inch than they legally have to, and they probably murmur all the way. But the Christian says the first mile was out of law, but the second mile is out of love. First mile out of law.
So it's to show, like actions speak louder than words.
Right.
So inwardly, we can be thinking, I am going to explode. But our actions, they're going to speak much louder than what we're feeling. The actions are going to point to something that's not of the earth, it's not worldly.
It's not normal.
It's not normal.
It's not normal.
Yeah, it's not normal. So then their instinct, their natural instinct is gonna.
Why?
It's gonna.
Why?
They're gonna want to know what is the motive.
What
did you just lost? You gave whatever you
What-
gave up yourself.
What did the centurion say when Jesus finally died on the cross? He heard his sayings. He heard him pray for them when they were nailing him to it.
This man surely was. This man surely.
Surely this was a righteous man and the Son of God.
Yeah.
I mean, he had 6 hours around him, and he was there. He was right by the cross, and he heard and he saw how he talked to people and his prayers and his what he said to the thief and everything else, and how he reacted, and how he didn't defend himself and fight back when he was ridiculed and spit on, and people were shaking their fist. He saved others, let him save himself, and all that kind of stuff. He didn't engage in that. He trusted himself to his Father. All right. So listen. No one goes more than they have to do. The Christian says, first mile, out of law. Second, out of love. That's the key right there. People, they see something different when we do more than is legally required of us. And what they hopefully see is Christ. Christians should do more than is mandated at their jobs. I mean, think about it, right? If you do just the bare minimum, all right, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to do this, and if I lollygag enough, I can get out of here in 5 hours, right? And so people do that. They do just enough, and and most people don't like the guy that's working, that's a diligent worker, because it makes them look like sluggards, right? But if you do more, if you work hard, if you show desire, then it says something. When you work joyfully, it says something. And Christians should be tenants and landlords that go beyond the legal expectations. No, I got to put the heat on by October 1st, but it's freezing in September 15th. No, the law says I can go October 1st. Let them freeze for 15 days. No, you know what? I'll take it out of my pocket. I'm going to give them heat on the 15th because it's cold. Right? We should not only do everything by the book, but we should figuratively speaking add a few pages, so to speak. All right. Do you know what going the extra mile shows? It shows that you are done with self. It shows that you are done with self, that you're done fighting for your rights. You're done defending yourself. You're done retaliating. So you gladly pay your taxes, right? You will gladly obey the laws, even if you don't like them. Like George Mueller, you've had a funeral and you've been buried. Therefore, you don't take offense at injustices because you know that before God, you were once a colossal offender, and your offenses against him cost Jesus his very life. And when you see it that way, it's a little easier to deal with it this way. All right, finally, the fourth illustration, a Christian's attitude towards money, verse 42. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. And if you really want to be done with self, then you have to adjust your attitude towards money. This is a big one. In fact, I don't want to scare you away for the next 2 months, but when I get to chapters 8 and 9 of 2 Corinthians, all about giving. And it's all about this contribution the Corinthians were supposed to be given to the poor Jews in Jerusalem. And Paul's going to lay down principle after principle after principle on giving. And it's beautiful and it's wonderful. But this is really because there's such abuse in so much of the Christian world or the religious world that we're very and there's a real lack of trust in this area amongst many. But if you want to be done with self, we need to adjust our attitude towards money. And when you die to self, You don't retaliate or take revenge, and you don't hold on to your stuff. No, you become generous with it and desirous to bless others with it. Now, let me clear up a potential misunderstanding here. Jesus is not saying you are to give and to lend to every single person who asks for it. If that were the case, every single Christian would be impoverished, and we would all be begging bread and money because none of us would have it, because we'd be giving it away, all of our stuff, especially to the charlatans. So he's not saying that. No, Jesus does not mean that we give indiscriminately to panhandlers who spend it on drinking and drugs. And he's not saying that we should give it to lazy people who won't work. Because Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 3, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. Mm-hmm. So don't be mooching off the people of God because you know that you think they're going to be soft, right? If somebody's not going to work, if they're lazy, right? I had a Christian brother who owned his own business years ago, and he hired this guy from church to help him, and the guy wasn't working. And he said to me, what do I do? I said, give him a warning, and if he doesn't shape up, fire him. Like, he's playing the, well, we're both Christians, we're brothers. Well, we are brothers, but right now you work for me. And if this is your job, and if you're not doing your job, I'll give you one shot, one chance to do better, and then if you don't do better, I'm going to let you go. He said I could shoot that. I said I would do that. I said I wouldn't think twice about that. All right, because people take advantage. They take advantage. All right, the principle that he's laying down here is that a selfless attitude should also extend to our stuff. A selfless attitude should also extend to our stuff. How can we be selfless in all these other areas and we're like holding on to and guarding and hoarding, whatever stuff we have? You know what I mean? So it's inconsistent is what he's saying. The child of God no longer says what's mine is mine, and I can't help you because I don't want to deplete what's mine. Right? The Jews were told by Moses in Deuteronomy 15, 7 and 8. Somebody read that?
There is among you a poor man of your brethren, within any of the gates of your land, which the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not harden your heart, nor shut your hand from your poor brother, but you shall open your hand wide to him, and willingly lend him, sufficient for his need, whatever he needs.
All right. Don't shut your hand or your heart from this guy. And John, he reiterates this principle in 1 John 3:17. Somebody read that?
But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him?
It's a rhetorical question. All right. How can we say God loves us and we love God when we have a brother or sister in need, and that's the critical word, they need. He's not saying he wants to go to Disney World and then he needs a Rolls Royce and the Rolex is falling out of shape and he's saying need. That's like basic stuff, right? Food, shelter, clothing, that kind of stuff, right? So if he has a need, what?
And clothing.
Clothing, absolutely. So what you need to survive. All right? And Matthew 6 tells us what we need of food and clothing. So necessities in our day. And 1 Timothy 6:8 tells us, and having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. Meaning, I'm good. God has given me what I need, whatever I need is, and oftentimes he's given us much more than what we need. If we would really be honest, God has lavished us with a whole lot more. But what we need to live, he's given us. All right, so what Jesus is saying is that we shouldn't hold on to our stuff just as we shouldn't hold on to our rights. He's not saying we have to give everything away, but we shouldn't hold it like that. You know what I mean? Instead, we should be generous, like God has been to us in sending his son to die for us. So we see that Jesus' whole point in these 4 illustrations is that his people don't defend themselves, they don't retaliate. We are not vigilantes, we don't go tit for tat with people. And that's because his people don't think anything of themselves. They've died to self and are alive in Christ. They obey the laws of the land. As long as they are not sinful, we're to obey them. And they stand up for justice and for righteousness. And they will defend others for righteousness' sake, but they won't stand up for themselves. They have died to the world. Therefore, its ways must no longer give rise to retaliation and revenge. This is what Jesus means when he says in Matthew 10:39, he who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. In other words, the one who is dying to self, that one has life. The one who will not die to self, he could say he has life, but there's no evidence he has life. Because the reality is, Christians are poor in spirit. And again, it's not like we've aced any of these things. We haven't. But the moment he saves us, we've already become, all of the Beatitudes are already part of us. Just like all of the fruit of the Spirit is given to us, right? But now we're growing in them. It's starting to increase as we walk and trust and struggle and see his grace and have victory over here and there and whatnot. We grow, right? And so we should be growing in this selflessness and dying to self and trusting the Lord to take care of those situations. All right. So in closing, I just leave you with one point of application, is that we should follow Christ and give up our rights. Listen, nobody gave up more than he did, right? He put aside for a season his divine prerogatives, left heaven, left communion with God, left glory with God, and became a man, right? And for 33 years or so, he veiled his deity, put it behind the curtain, so to speak. He didn't lose it. He didn't stop being God, right? God can't stop being God because God's eternal. But he veiled it, and he became one of us, and he lived among us. And as a man, he gave up everything to come, but even as a man, he lowered himself all the way to the cross. And so there's our great example, right? In giving up our rights as we see them, right? No one gave up more than him.
He knew what he was going to have to do.
He knew.
Hey, actually, there is a condition where such trauma can cause your actual sweat to form drops of blood. And that's what, there is a medical condition, I don't know the name of it, but actually he knew what he was going to do. And I want to ask you one other thing while you're still, sometimes it's hard in this world, we know there are many difficulties, but and of course, no tit for tat. But when you're driving around, somebody cuts you off. I don't get angry anymore, but is this wrong to take? I think to myself, it's a fallen world.
Well, that's right.
Is that the wrong attitude to take? I say, it's a fallen world, so I can't do nothing about it. Is that wrong?
I would say no. Yeah. I would say driving is a tremendous sanctifying tool for Christians. I would say being married is a tremendous sanctifying tool. I would say having kids is a tremendous sanctifying tool. What else, Dylan? Work. Those are the big ones, right? But yeah, so obviously we have to just pray that God would help us lose more and more this self about me. You said something about me. You did something against me. You didn't do something for me.
Body of flesh.
Right, and the more we could lose the thinking of self and keep going upward, the more and more we look like Jesus. Right? All right, any questions before we close?
One question about, not totally related, but in Leviticus, they say, we have the main law, thou shalt not kill, and then they talk about the sin, these are the sins, but then they talk about the punishment. And so if someone divorces, surely they shall be killed, or something to that effect. Are those meant to be literal, that they should be killed?
No. So Israel was the governor of Israel was God. It was a theocracy. All right, I mean, he governed them. No other nation ever has been a theocracy, and of course they disobeyed him greatly. And so God governed the people, right? He gave civil laws to govern the people, and that's what we're talking about here. He gave laws that would be laws for all men for all time, which are love your neighbor, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then he gave laws dealing with the worship, with the worship and sacrifices and whatnot. So he gave like 3 categories. The only one that stands today, right, would be the moral laws. Don't kill, love your neighbor, and all that kind of stuff.
Don't
All right, right.
adultery, but not the death part.
No.
So
no.
that's why I found it was
No.
interesting in
Yeah.
Leviticus, they just went
Right,
death,
and
death,
that's why.
death.
So that's why when you get to Romans 13, he says obey the governing authorities, because he doesn't say capitalism, communism.
Right.
Doesn't say totalitarianism. He doesn't say monarchy. He doesn't say anything. He just says whatever the governing authorities are, obey those laws unless those laws are sinful. Right. So we have a capitalistic society. We're to obey all laws. If you were in North Korea, you wouldn't have that.
Right.
You would have a different set of laws. So he recognizes that there's going to be different types of government, but government in general, he says, is good, unless the leaders are wicked, and oftentimes, the people are oppressed because of it.
To put it simply, it says we are to obey the government unless
Right. Yeah.
it conflicts with God's teaching.
Right. Well, then we always side. We always go upward.
Even we are made in the image of God. That means that we're made to look like Him, but morally speaking, we are made in His image, and spiritually speaking, we are in His image, and intellectually, we are in His image.
Yeah, and we also
morally,
have
spiritually, and
we also have some of His characteristics to some degree, and so the point is that in Israel. Right, God was the civil leader. He was the governor of the nation, and He gave them laws how to govern their nation. And those laws were primarily to separate them, to show them right and wrong, good and evil, and that kind of stuff. Separate them from the heathen nations around them. And certainly you see that in the laws of all the worship laws and the ceremonial laws. All right. Yeah. All right. Well, let's pray. Let's pray. Yes, Walter.
oh no, I was just going to say, even give the government what is due to government, as Christ has says, give to Caesar what is Caesar,
Right.
but give to God what is God's.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. So, all right. Let me ask, Mike, would you pray?